It's not just the EU. It's the entire world. You can't hide from cookie banners anywhere on this planet. If you go to goddamn Mars on one of Elon's rockets and you try to access a webpage, you'll still see a cookie banner. No one in the universe is safe from this nonsense. It sometimes feels like we're barely better off. Like, web pages aren't that different from what they were in the late 90s, early 2000s. They're still just forms. They still just write to databases. A lot of people, I think, are very uncomfortable with the fact that they are essentially crud monkeys. They just make systems that create, read, update, or delete rows in a database. And they have to compensate for that existential dread by overcomplicating things. That's a huge part of the satisfaction of driving a race car, is driving it at the edge of adhesion, as we call it, where you're essentially just a tiny movement away from spinning out. Doesn't take much, then the car starts rotating. Once it starts rotating, you lose grip and you're going for the wall. That balance of danger and skill is what's so intoxicating.
The following is a conversation with David Heinemeier Hansson, also known as DHH. He is a legend in the programming and tech world, brilliant and insightful, sometimes controversial, and always fun to talk to. He's the creator of Ruby on Rails, which is an influential web development framework behind many websites used by millions of people, including Shopify, GitHub, and Airbnb. He is the co-owner and CTO of 37 Signals that created Basecamp, HEY, and Once. He is a New York Times best-selling author, together with his co-author, Jason Fried, of 4 books: Rework, Remote, Getting Real, and It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And on top of that, he's also a race car driver, including being a class winner at the legendary 24-hour Le Mans race. This is a Lex Rubin podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description and consider subscribing to this channel. And now, dear friends, here's DHH. For someone who became a legendary programmer, you officially got into programming late in life. And I guess that's because you tried to learn how to program a few times and you failed. So can you tell me the full story, the saga of your failures to learn programming? Was Commodore 64 involved?
Commodore 64 was the inspiration. I really wanted a Commodore 64. That was the first computer I ever sat down in front. And the way I sat down in front of it was, I was 5 years old, and there was this one kid on my street who had a Commodore 64. No one else had a computer, so we were all the kids just getting over there, and we were all playing Yer Kung Fu. I don't know if you've ever seen that game. It was one of the original fighting games. It's really a great game, and I was playing that for the first time at 5 years old. And we were like 7 kids sitting up in this one kid's bedroom, all taking our turn to play the game. And I just found that unbelievably interesting. And I begged and I begged and I begged my dad, could I get a computer? And he finally comes home, he's like, I got your computer. I was like, yes, my own Commodore 64. And he pulls out this black, green, and blue keyboard. That's an Armstrong 464. I was like, Dad, what's this?
The disappointment.
This is not a Commodore 64, but it was a computer. So I got my first computer at essentially 6 years old, that Armstrong 464. And of course, the first thing I wanted to do, I wanted to play video games. And I think the computer, which he, by the way, had traded for a TV and a stereo recorder or something like that, came with like 2 games. One was this Frogger game where you had to escape from underground. It was actually kind of dark, like this frog, you're trying to get it out from underground. And I was pretty bad at it. And I only had those 2 games, and then I wanted more games. And one way to get more games when you're a kid who doesn't have a lot of money, I can't just buy a bunch of games, is to type them in yourself. Back in 84, 85, magazines would literally print source code at the back of their magazines, and you could just sit and type it in. So I tried to do that, and it would take like 2 hours to print this game into the Armstrong. And of course, I'd make some spelling mistake along the way, and something wouldn't work, and the whole thing, I wasn't that good of English. I was born in Denmark. So I was really trying to get into it because I wanted all these games. I didn't have the money to buy them. And I tried quite hard for quite a while to get into it, but it just never clicked. And then I discovered the magic of piracy. And after that, I kind of basically just took some time off from learning to program because, well, now suddenly I had access to all sorts of games. So that was the first attempt, like around 6, 7 years old. And what's funny is I remember these fragments. I remember not understanding the purpose of a variable. if there's a thing and you assign something, why would you assign another thing to it? So for some reason, I understood constants. Like constants made sense to me, but variables didn't. Then maybe I'm 11 or 12. I've gotten into the Amiga at this point. The Amiga, by the way, still perhaps my favorite computer of all time. I mean, this is one of those things where you're like, people get older and they're like, oh, the music from the 80s was amazing. To me, even as someone who loves computers, who loves new computers, the Amiga was this magical machine that was made by the same company that produced the Commodore 64. And I got the Amiga 500, I think in 87.
Look at this sexy thing. That is a sexy machine right there.
This is from an age, by the way, where computing wasn't global in the same sense. The different territories had different computers that were popular. The Amiga was really popular in Europe, but it wasn't very popular at all in the US, as far as I understand it. It wasn't popular in Japan. There were just different machines. The Apple II was a big thing in the US. I'd never even heard of Apple in the 80s in Copenhagen. But the Amiga 500 was the machine that brought me to want to try it again. And you know what's funny? The reason I wanted to try it again was I remembered the first time to learn, and then there was this programming language that was literally called Easy Amos. Like the easy version of Amos. I'm like, if it's Easy Amos, how hard can it be? I gotta be able to figure this out. And this time I tried harder. I got into conditionals, I got into loops, I got into all these things, and I couldn't do it. And on the second attempt, I really got to the point of like, maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe programming is just not, maybe it's too much math. Like, I like math in this sort of superficial way. I don't like it in the deep way that some of my perhaps slightly nerdier friends did, who I had tremendous respect for. Like, I'm not that person. I'm not the math geek who's going to figure it all out. So after that attempt with Easy Amos and failing, to even get, I don't even think I completed one even very basic game. I thought, the program's just not for me. I'm going to have to do something else. I still love computers. I still love video games. I actually, at that time, had already begun making friends with people who knew how to program, who weren't even programming Easy Amos. They were programming freaking assembler. And I would sit down and just go, the moves and the memories and the copies, how do you even do this? I don't even understand how you go from this to Amiga demos, for example. That was the big thing with the Amiga. It had this wonderful demo scene in Europe. It's this really interesting period of time in the Amiga's history where you had all these programmers spread out mostly all over Europe who would compete on graphic competitions where you could probably bring one of these up on YouTube. on this thing, they would make these little almost like music videos, combining some MIDI music, combining some cool graphics, and they would do all of it in like 4K. 4 kilobytes, that is. Not 4Ks of revolution, 4 kilobytes of memory. And I just thought that was such a cool scene. This was obviously pre-internet. It was even pre-BBS, bulletin board systems to some extent. It was you swap your demo software with someone else by sending them a disk in the mail, like the 3.5s. And I was enamored with that whole scene. I was enamored with what they were able to create. And I just wanted to be a part of it, even though I kind of didn't have any skills to contribute. And that's how I got into running BBSs. I didn't learn programming then, and I wouldn't learn programming until much later, until I was almost 20 years old. The bulletin board systems existed in this funny space where they were partly a service to the demo scenes, allowing all these demo groups to distribute their amazing demos. And then it was also a place to trade pirated software. And I ended up starting one of those when I was 14 years old. In my tiny little bedroom in Copenhagen. I had my, at that point, Amiga 4000. I had 3 telephone lines coming into my tiny room.
Nice.
Which was funny because, again, I'm 14 years old. By the time I was installing my 3rd line, you had to get someone from the telephone company to come do it. I get this guy, and he's just looking around like, what is this? Why the hell is a 14-year-old having 3 phone lines into their tiny little bedroom? What's going on here? Why are all these modems blinking red and black and making funny sounds?
Did your parents know?
They did and they didn't. They knew I had the phone lines. They knew I had the computer. I don't think they really understood that I was trading pirated software that was both illegal and whatever else was going on.
Oh, we should probably say that in Europe, maybe you can comment on this, especially in Eastern Europe, but Europe in general, piracy, I think, was more acceptable than it was in the United States. I don't know. Maybe it's just my upbringing.
Even that conversation wasn't present. I never spoke to anyone growing up in Denmark who had any moral qualms whatsoever about piracy. It was just completely accepted that You're a kid. You want a lot of games. You don't have a lot of money. What do? You trade.
Yeah.
Some people would occasionally buy a game. I mean, I once bought a Sega Master System, and I bought one game because that was what I could afford. I got Afterburner 2. I don't know if you've ever played that game. It's pretty bad implementation on the Sega Master System, but it was like 600 krowners. And I was making money at that time doing newspaper delivery. I had to do that for a month to afford one game. I liked video games way too much to wait a month just to get one game. So piracy was just the way you did it. And that was how I got into running this bulletin board system, being part of the demo scene, being part of the piracy scene to some extent. And then also at some point realizing, oh, you can actually also make money on this. And this can fund buying more phone lines and buying more modems and buying more Amigas. Oh yeah, that was one of the demo parties. These were amazing things.
What am I looking at?
Isn't that
Look
amazing?
at all those CRT monitors.
All these CRT monitors. Again, when I was 14, I don't understand fully why my parents allowed this, but I traveled from Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, to Aarhus, this tiny little town in Jutland, on the train with a bunch of dudes who were like late teens in their 20s. I'm 14 years old. Yeah. I'm lugging my 14-inch CRT monitor with my computer in the back to go to the party. That was what it was called. That was the biggest demo scene party at that time. And it was exactly as you see in that picture. Thousands of people just lining up with their computers, programming demos all day long, and trading these things back and forth.
That's kind of awesome. Not going to lie. It's a little ridiculous.
It's totally awesome. And I miss it in ways where the internet has connected people in some ways. But the connection you get from sitting right next to someone else who has their own CRT monitor, who's lugged it halfway around the country to get there, is truly special. Because it was also just this burst of creativity. You're constantly running around. You're constantly surrounded by people who are really good at what they could do. They're really good at programming computers. It's infectious. It was part of that pang I felt then going like, oh man, why can't I figure this out? I mean, why can't I even figure out EC Amos? It's kind of frustrating.
But on your third attempt, you're a little more successful.
So third attempt is when I start getting it. This is when I start helping out, let's say, building things for the internet. So around 95, I think it is, or 96, I discovered the internet. Actually, in ninth grade, that was my first experience. I went to some university in Denmark, and in ninth grade, we had this excursion, and they sat us down in front of a computer, and the computer had Netscape Navigator, the first version, or maybe it was even the precursor to that. And they had a text editor, and us kids just got like, hey, build something on the internet. And it was just HTML, and the first thing you do is like, oh, I can make the text blink by just putting in this tag and saving it. That was that moment. That was actually when I reawakened the urge to want to learn to program because I got a positive experience. All the other experiences I had with programming was I'd spend hours typing something in, I'd click run, and it wouldn't work. And I'd get an error message that made no sense to me as a kid, either at 6 or 7 or at 12. And here I am sitting in front of a computer connected to the internet, and I'm making text blink. I'm making it larger. I'm turning it into an H1 or an H2. And these guys out here, we just did it for like an hour and a half. And suddenly I go, oh, I can make things for the internet that someone in Germany can be able to access and see. And I don't have to ask anyone for permission. This is super cool. I got to do more of this. So I got into the internet. I got into working with HTML. And I still had all these friends from these demo parties. And I started working with them on creating gaming websites. I'd write about the video games. I'd review them. This was another good way of getting new video games was to walk down to some store and say like, hey, I'm a journalist. I'm like this 15-year-old kid. And they're looking at me. You're a journalist? Yeah, can I borrow some games? Because this was when games moved on to the PlayStation and these other things you couldn't just as easily pirate, at least not at first. So I went down there, did all that, and that started the journey of the internet for me. It started working on these gaming websites, working with programmers, figuring out that I could do something. I could work on the HTML part. It's not really programming, but it kind of smells like it. You're talking to a computer, you're making it put text on the screen, and you're communicating with someone halfway around the world. So that became my pathway back into programming. And then slowly I picked up more and more of it. First website I did with someone, one of these programmers from the demo scene that was dynamic, was ASP.NET. I wasn't even actually called .NET. That was what we started on. And then we moved on to PHP. And PHP was when I finally got it. When it finally clicked, when conditionals and loops and variables and all of that stuff started to make sense enough to me that I thought, I can do this.
So would it be fair to say that we wouldn't have DHH without PHP, and therefore you owe all of your success to PHP?
100% that's true. And it's even better than that, because his PHP to me didn't just give me a start in terms of making my own web applications. It actually gave me a bar. In many ways, I think the pinnacle of web developer ergonomics is late 90s PHP. You write this script, you FTP it to a server, and instantly it's deployed.
Yep.
Instantly it's available. You change anything in that file and you reload, boom, it's right there. There's no web servers, there's no setup. There's just an Apache that runs mod PHP. And it was essentially the easiest way to get a dynamic web page up and going. And this is one of the things I've been chasing that high for basically the rest of my career, that it was so easy to make things for the internet in the mid to late 90s. How did we lose the sensibilities that allowed us to not just work this way, but get new people into the industry, to give them those success experiences that I had, adding a freaking blink tag to an HTML page, FTPing a PHP page to an Apache web server without knowing really anything about anything, without knowing anything about frameworks, without knowing anything about setup. All of that stuff have really taken us to a place where it sometimes feels like we're barely better off. Like, web pages aren't that different from what they were in the late 90s, early 2000s. They're still just forms. They still just write to databases. A lot of people, I think, are very uncomfortable with the fact that they are essentially CRUD monkeys. They just make systems that create, read, update, or delete rows in a database. And they have to compensate for that existential dread by overcomplicating things. Now, that's a bit of a character. There's more to it, and there's things you can learn for more sophisticated ways of thinking about this, but there's still an ideal here, which is why I was so happy you had Peter Levels on, because he still basically works like this. Yeah. And I look at that and go like, man, that's amazing.
Yeah, you're chasing that high. He's been high all along.
Yes.
Using PHP, jQuery, and SQLite.
I think it's amazing because he's proving that this isn't just a nostalgic dream. He's actually doing it. He's running all these businesses. Now, some of that is, as he would admit up front, is that he's just one guy. And you can do different things when you're just one guy. When you're working in a team, when I started working with Jason Fried on Basecamp, we at first didn't use version control together. I used version control for myself, and then I thought, you know what? Designers, they're probably not smart enough to figure out CVS. Yeah. And therefore, I just like, no, you just FTP it up. You just FTP it. I knew they knew how to do FTP. And then after the third time I had overridden their changes, I was like, ah, damn it. I guess I got to teach Jason CVS to not do that again. But I think there's still way more truth to the fact that we can work the way we did in the 90s, work the way Peter works today, even in the team context, and that we've been far too willing to hand over far too much of our developer ergonomics to the merchants of complexity.
And you've been chasing that with Rails 8. So how do you bring all the cool features of a modern framework and make it no build, make it as easy to create something and to ship it as it was in the 90s with just PHP? It's very difficult for me to beat the Peter Levels approach. Of just it's so easy to just ship some PHP.
And it should be. Why should it be harder than that? Our computers today are almost infinitely faster than what they were in the 90s. So shouldn't we be able to work in even easier ways? We should be looking back on the 90s and go like, oh, that was way too complicated. Now we have more sophisticated technology that's way faster and it allows us to work in these easier to use ways, but that's not true. But now you can see the line I draw in my work with Ruby on Rails, and especially with Rails 8. No build, to me, is reaching back to that 90s feeling and going, now we can do some of those things without giving up on all the progress. Because I do think you can get too nostalgic. I do think you can start just fantasizing that everything was better in the 90s. It wasn't. I mean, I was there. There was a lot of things that sucked. And if we can somehow find a way to combine the advantages and advances we've had over the past 20 years with that ease of developer ergonomics, we can win. No build is a rejection of the part of web development I've hated the most in the past 10, 15 years, which is the JavaScript scene. Yeah. And I don't say that as someone who hates JavaScript. I mean, I often joke that JavaScript is my second favorite programming language. It's a very distant second. Yeah. Ruby is by far and away number one, but I actually like JavaScript. I don't think it's a bad language. It gets a lot of flack people add a string of 2 plus a 1 and it gives something nonsense. And I just go like, yeah, but why would you do that? Just don't do that. The language is actually quite lovely, especially the modern version. ES6 that really introduced a proper class syntax to it so I could work with JavaScript in many of the same ways that I love working with Ruby, made things so much better. But in the early 2010s until quite recently, all of that advancement happened in pre-processing, happened in build pipelines. The browsers couldn't speak a dialect of JavaScript that was pleasant to work with, so everyone started to pre-compiling their JavaScript to be able to use more modern ways of programming with a browser that was seen as stuck with an ancient version of JavaScript that no one actually wanted to work with. And that made sense to me, but it was also deeply unpleasant. And I remember thinking during that time, the dark ages, as I refer to them with JavaScript, that this cannot be the final destination. There's no way that we have managed to turn the internet into such an unpleasant place to work, where I would start working on a project in JavaScript using Webpack and all of these dependencies, and I would put it down for literally 5 minutes, and the thing wouldn't compile anymore. The amount of churn that the JavaScript community, especially with its frameworks and its tooling, went through in the decade from 2010 to 2020 was absurd. And you had to be trapped inside of that asylum to not realize what an utterly perverse situation we had landed ourselves in. Why does everything break all the time? I mean, the joke wouldn't be just that the software would break. That would annoy me personally. But then I'd go on Hacker News and I'd see some thread on the latest JavaScript release of some framework. And the thread would be like, someone would ask, well, aren't we using the thing we just used 3 months ago? And people would be like, that thing is so outdated. That's so 3 months ago. You got to get with the new program. We're completely rewriting everything for the umpteenth time. And anything you've learned in the framework you've been spending the last amount of time on, it's all useless. You got to throw everything out and you got to start over. Why aren't you doing it, stupid idiot?
Is that a kind of mass hysteria that took over the developer community, you think? Like where you have to keep creating new frameworks and new frameworks? And are we past that dark age?
I think we're getting out of it. And we're getting out of it because browsers have gotten so much better. There was a stagnation in browser technology. Some of it was an overhang all the way back from IE5. So IE5 essentially put the whole internet development experience into a deep freeze because Microsoft won the browser wars in the mid-2000s. And then they basically disbanded their browser development team because they're like, all right, job done. We don't need any more innovation on the internet. Can we just go back to writing Windows forms or something now that we control everything? Yeah. And it really wasn't until obviously Firefox kind of kindled a little bit of something, then Chrome got into the scene, and Google got serious about moving the web forward, that you had a kindling of maybe the browser could be better. Maybe the browser wasn't frozen in time in 2005. Maybe the browser could actually evolve like the development platform that it is. But then what happened was you had a lot of smart people who poured in to the web because the web turned out to be the greatest application development platform of all time. This was where all the money was being made. This was where all the billionaires were being minted. This was where the Facebooks and whatever of the world came to be. So you had all of this brain power applied to the problem of how to work with the web. And there were some very smart people with some, I'm sure, very good ideas who did not have programmer happiness as their motivation number one. They had other priorities, and those priorities allowed them to discount and even rationalize the complexity they were injecting everywhere. Some of that complexity came from organizational structure. When you have a company like Facebook, for example, that does depend on the web and want to push it forward, but have sliced the development job into these tiny little niches. I'm a front-end glob pipeline configurator. Oh, yeah, well, I'm a front-end whatever engineer. And suddenly, the web developer was no longer one person. It was 15 different roles. That in itself injected a ton of complexity. But I also want to give it the bold case here, which was that some of that complexity was necessary to get to where we are today. That the complexity was a bridge. It wasn't the destination, but we had to cross that bridge to get to where we are today, where browsers are, frankly, incredible. The JavaScript you can write in a text file and then serve on a web server for a browser to ingest is amazing. It's actually a really good experience. You don't need any pre-processing. You can just write text files, send them to a browser, and you have an incredible development experience.
And we should also say that it can kind of be broken, at least the HTML, but even the JavaScript could be a little bit broken, and it kind of still works. Like maybe it half-ass works, but like just the amount of mess of smelly code that a browser has to deal with is insane.
This is one of the hardest problems in computing today, is to parse the entire internet. Because thankfully, for us as web developers, but perhaps not so much for the browser developers, every web page that has ever been created, minus the brief period with Flash, still runs today. The web page I did in 9th grade would render on a modern browser today, 30 years later.
Crazy.
That is completely crazy when you think about the amount of evolution we've had with the web, how much better we've made it, how many more standards browsers have adopted. It's essentially an Apollo project today to create a new browser, which is why it doesn't happen very often, which is why even companies like Microsoft have to throw in the towel and say, we can't do it. Now, I actually don't think that's good for the web. There is the danger of the monoculture if we just get a single browser engine that runs everything, and we are in danger of that. I love the fact that the Ladybird project, for example, is trying to make a new browser engine from scratch. I supported that project. I would encourage people to look into that. It's really a wonderful thing. It's staffed by a bunch of people who worked on other browser projects in the past.
Truly independent web browser.
We really need that. But I can hold that thought in my head. At the same time, I hold the thought in my head that Google's Chrome was pivotal to the web surviving as the premier web development platform. If it had not been for Google and their entire business depending on a thriving open web, Apple, Microsoft, I think would have been just as fine to see the web go away, to disappear into being something that just served native web application or native mobile applications and native desktop applications that they could completely control. So I have all sorts of problems with Google, but it's not Chrome. Chrome is a complete gift to web developers everywhere, to the web as a development platform. And they deserve an enormous amount of credit, I think, for that. Even if it's entangled with their business model and half of Chrome is code that spies on you or informs targeted ads and a bunch of things I'm not a big fan of. I can divorce that from the fact that we need champions in the corner of the web who have trillions of dollars of market cap value riding on the open web.
We're going to take tangents upon a tangent upon a tangent. So let's go to Chrome. I think Chrome positive impact on humanity is immeasurable for reasons that you just described. On the technology front, the features they present, the competition they created, it's spurred on this wonderful flourishing of web technologies. But anyway, I have to ask you about the recent stuff with the DOJ trying to split up Chrome and Google. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this does harm?
It's a disaster. And I say that as someone who's been very sympathetic to the antitrust fight, because I do think we have antitrust problems in technology. But the one place where we don't have them, by and large, is with browsers, is with the tools we use to access the open web. First of all, we have Firefox. Now, Firefox is not doing all that great, and Firefox has been propped up by Google for many years to deter from exactly what's going on with the DOJ, that they were the only game in town. Apple has Safari. I have a bunch of problems with Apple too, but I love Safari. I love the fact that we have a premier browser running on a premier operating system, that people can't turn the web into just a Chrome experience. But I also think that the open web needs this $1 trillion champion, or at least benefits from it. Maybe it doesn't need it, but it certainly benefits from it. And of all the things that are wrong with monopoly formation in technology, Chrome is the last thing. And this is why I get so frustrated sometimes about the or the monopoly fight. That there are real problems, and we should be focusing on the premier problems first, like the toll booths on our mobile phones. They're a far bigger problem. It's not the open web. It's not the tools that we use to access the open web. If I don't want to use Chrome, if my customers of my businesses that run on the internet don't want to use Chrome, they don't have to. We're never forced to go through it. The open internet is still open. So I think it's a real shame that the DOJ has chosen to pursue Google in this way. I do think there are other things you can nail Google for, and their ad monopoly maybe, or the shenanigans they've done in controlling both sides of the ad ledger, that they both control the supply and the demand, there are problems. Chrome isn't it. And you end up making the web much worse. And this is the thing we always got to remember when we think about legislation, when we think about monopoly fights, is you may not like how things look today. And you may want to do something about it, but you may also make it worse. The good intentions behind the GDPR in Europe currently has amounted to what? Cookie banners that everyone on the internet hates, that helps no one do anything better, anything more efficient, that saves no privacy in any way, shape, or form, has been a complete boondoggle that has only enriched lawyers and accountants and bureaucrats.